I'm Gara LaMarche, and I'm the president of the Democracy Alliance. Well, there have been a lot of changes in criminal justice policy, but there's also been an enormous number of changes in criminal justice advocacy and in the support for criminal justice advocacy. So I got to the Open Society Foundations almost 20 years ago when George Soros decided he wanted to turn his philanthropy to the United States. He had originally been involved in Eastern Europe and democratization and civil society issues in those places. And he decided in the mid-1990s that the United States had open society problems as well. Not quite the same as he had encountered in Eastern Europe. At least in those days, he felt that the basic right to dissent and to free institutions was fairly secure. But what he was concerned about in the United States, and it's very prescient when you think about the debate that we're having right now, was inequality. The inequality issues that impair open society. And as we looked at those, the fundamental one that we began to deal with, and the Open Society Foundations is still a leader in, had to do with the criminal justice system and the recognition that mass incarceration was imperiling both liberty and open society in the United States. So in 1996, we launched something that we then called the Center for Crime, Communities, and Culture, and began a significant funding program on criminal justice advocacy that continues to this day. Well, I think the gains policy-wise have largely occurred in the drug policy arena, in the ending of a certain taboo about talking about the way we deal with drugs. And so I think that the number of states that have decriminalized possession of small amounts of marijuana, that have passed medical marijuana laws, things like that, have been good. I think you've seen policy changes in a number of states about who we keep in prison and why and for how long, and that has been the result of a very interesting alliance between, or among, I would say, movement advocates. So you have much more involvement in recent years, and I think Open Society had a lot to do with this, by both the formerly incarcerated and their families. So you have advocacy by people most affected. You have a certain kind of civil rights advocacy. I mean, we can see that in the streets right now. And you have, kind of on the other end of the political spectrum, two kinds of people who are involved in care and who've been very significant in the debate. On the one hand, you have Evangelical Christians who have a view about human redemption and want to make sure that people get a second chance. And you also have fiscal conservatives who, whatever they may feel about the redemption aspect and whatever their views may be about the civil rights aspects of it, understand that the cost of incarcerating people the way we do is unsustainable, and that from a kind of an efficient government point of view, the incarceration state makes no sense. So all those things have come together. On top of that, it's important to say, or underneath that, whatever the right metaphor is, you have the beginnings of significant attitudinal and cultural change. So sometime in the last 10 years or so, the potency of crime as a political wedge issue seemed to peter out. You have not seen it, by and large, as an electoral issue. For whatever reason, it's lost its political potency, and the isolation that we felt initially at Open Society in being virtually the only funders concerned with criminal justice, incarceration, and race, that's changed a lot. So it seems to me that if the gains that we are making in criminal justice reform, and they're real, both in policy terms and in public opinion and awareness terms, if those are to be sustained over the long haul, what has to do that is social movement. So I think that when I see people say, you know, we have the, Grover Norquist and those types with us, I'm happy about that, and I think that's a very good thing. But I think it's important to understand that 15 or 20 years has been spent in the investment in advocacy that has pushed policymakers to feel compelled to deal with this. Significant movement, whether it's in the civil rights movement of the 60s, or the anti-war movements, or the environmental movements, the gay rights movement, significant movement is propelled by people who have the most on the line stepping forward to make it uncomfortable for people in power, frankly. Forcing by movement of those issues onto the policy agenda That's the way change happens. It is the dovetailing of research, evidence, advocacy with activism that really, in any significant way in this society or any society over the decades and over the centuries, is how you actually propel change forward. You need both of them. And if I'm encouraged by anything right now, it's that a lot of the work that we've been investing in of scholarship and advocacy and public policy work is being joined with powerful social movement in a way that really has the capacity to drive it significantly forward. I saw a really distinct shift in the somewhere in the 90s or the early 2000s where the communities most affected began to take the reins themselves for change, and you began to see the advocates for changing the laws be not people speaking for other people mostly, but people speaking for their own communities and their own families. And the entry into the sphere of activism of formerly incarcerated people and their families and their loved ones was, to me, a significant turning point. And what it has in common with the stories of other social movements, whether it's the feminist movement or the gay rights movement, is you don't get significant change unless the people most in need of the change are leading the fight for change. And that was what began to change in the criminal justice realm in the last 10 or 15 years. It moved from a policy debate to a social justice activism, civil rights activism issue. And that really was a tipping point.